How are we doing there, boys and girls? Manthis here, and welcome to the first of a new podcast. Yes, this is going to be a weekly talk where I get the opportunity to put together a slightly longer form video for you guys, talking about something specific. Now, short form content is great. Those little bite-sized 4 or 5 minute videos are good for sort of like tips and stuff, but if we really want to dive deep into a topic, we need a slightly longer platform to do it on, and so I thought, well, let's try and put something together. I do, though, the very first thing is I need some help from you guys. I need some suggestions for a name. I'm not good at coming up with names. I'm terrible at this sort of stuff. So leave some comments down below if you have a sensible, albeit slightly humorous, whatever. Leave some suggestions down below for a name for the podcast, and I'll take them into consideration. But before we begin, before we get into today's topic of conversation, I've of course got to give a shout out to my Patreons. Thank you to you guys. You're the ones that give me the ability to not have to chase views and clickbait on YouTube and to be able to actually put together content that I think is more valuable and more entertaining because of it. So big shout out to you guys. You guys obviously get a little bit of a head start on some of the video content we produce. You get some early access to it. Plus, of course, you get things like my TSM groups and operations, so you can have a stronger effect at goal making in game as well. So big shout out to you guys. Thank you, thank you. But what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about flipping. Flipping is a concept in World of Warcraft that's very, very easy to sort of understand. It's an easy concept to begin with. You're basically buying something at a low price and then selling it again for a higher price. The core foundation of flipping is pretty easy for most people to get their head around. But there are some nuances and things that we should probably talk about. And often I see things labeled as flipping when they're not necessarily. And there is some thought process that we can discuss to get better at this art. And it is an art. It's a skill at the end of the day. So I guess we should probably begin with, well, what actually is flipping? Yes, it's often the case of buying something at a low price and then selling it for a higher price. The sensible way to do it, though, is to act quick. It should be a quick gold-making system. You should be buying and selling quickly at a profit. And there is an emphasis there on the word quickly. This is what differentiates flipping from things like investing. The fact that your aim is to do it at speed. You want to buy something, you want to throw it up on the auction house, and you want to sell it again quickly. Preferably, you want to make some profit when you do that, but of course, there's not the necessity to make huge amounts of gold on everything you do. This tends to leave the default mantra of buy something at a low price, sell it at a high price. What you should probably aim to do is actually buy at a low price and just sell it at the normal price. That is going to help speed up your flips and in turn get you your gold back quicker so that you can then go out and do the whole thing again. And that's kind of sort of the nice thing. One thing I want to talk about at the beginning of this, though, is actually what is not flipping. Like I said, there's lots of markets in World of Warcraft that often tend to be labeled as flipping. Well, they're not necessarily actually flipping. Trying to buy something to then sell at a later date is not flipping. We see this very frequently when we go from one patch to another patch. People speculate, what materials should we pick up? What do we think is going to go up in value in the new patch? Is there any changes that are going to affect the market prices? That's an investment. That's spending the gold that you already have, the capital that you already own, and putting it towards something that will grow in the future. This is not necessarily what I consider flipping. I tend to focus on flipping being that very quick turnaround stuff. Also, there are other things that often get labeled as flipping, but are not necessarily, and the reason you've got to differentiate them is because you should think about them in a slightly different way. Examples such as, buying herbs, milling them, turning them into ink, and then selling inks. This sort of, that's technically shuffling, right? You're taking something, turning it into something else before then selling it again. That is a totally different method, perfectly good one, and a very, very lucrative one if you do it at scale. But it's not strictly, by definition, flipping. So now we know what flipping is. Now we understand that there are some similarities between other gold making methods, but we're going to talk today specifically about flipping. We might talk about investing, we might talk about shuffling going forward in the future, but for now we're going to focus, laser focus in on flipping and talk about how we can do it better, more efficiently, and let's be honest, how to make more gold from doing it. So there are a few things to understand about flipping. Flipping is actually more of a skill than it is anything else. The ability to buy things, knowing when to buy things, knowing when the price is right on these items, and being able to flip them and sell them again quickly is a skill. And because speed is key to this, you often don't have time to kind of learn as you go. It's a market that people tend to want to know a lot about before they do it, because more often than not, if you just open the auction house and you start randomly buying things and listing them for more than what you spent on them, you will lose just as often as you win, and so you don't really go anywhere, and a lot of people consider it a waste of time. So flipping is a skill, and at its core, it's very easy to get into. But the skill gap is quite big with it. You can do some very basic stuff very quickly, very easily. But the professionals out there, the guys that are really good, the guys that can sit at the auction house all day long looking for opportunities, not only are they doing it on one realm, they probably have a list of items at the back of their minds that they sort of focus on. They're then doing it on multiple realms, and they're making millions and millions of gold every month from doing it. Those guys have probably been doing it for a long time, and they've developed that skill over time. And that skill pretty much only comes from practice. But if you practice at anything for long enough, you'll get good at it, right? To touch on something that we mentioned earlier, speed. Speed is key with flipping. We're focusing very heavily on the here and now with flipping. We want to be able to buy something and then sell it straight away. We don't want there to be even a few days wait between buying something and selling something. We want to focus heavily on fast turnover things. And because of this, our decisions that we use when it comes to looking at an item and sort of, gauging whether it's something we should buy, our decisions are often based very heavily on the current market value. What is that item worth, not only to you, but to other players? What is it worth right now? It doesn't really matter what the item was worth in the past or what you think the item might be worth in the future, because we're acting fast, and that's the key thing. This is why I consider flipping to be a very fast gold-making method. You can't always make massive amounts of gold with flipping straight away, but when you get good at it, you can sort of maybe go to the auction house in the morning, buy a few things, relist them, and by the evening, you've sold most of it again, and you've got more gold than you started with. And the big advantage of that is, of course, that you can spend just a couple of minutes a day doing it. When you get good at it, you can spend very little time. You can maybe 5 minutes scouting for a few key items, buy the cheap stuff, relist it, get it sold the same day, and finish the day with more gold than you started, without having to spend hours farming or hours crafting things or hours doing auction house PvP. This is one of the cool things about flipping, which is why a lot of people like to get into it. That pushes us quite nicely into some of the advantages of flipping. Why would you want to, get good at this skill? Why would you want to have that skill in your repertoire of gold making? Well, you can actually start flipping with very, very little amounts of gold. This is the attraction to many people. You don't need hundreds of thousands of gold to begin with. I, for example, have recently started playing on the NA realms. I got my account, brand new Battle.net account, brand new World of Warcraft account, brand new character, no heirlooms, no mounts, no nothing, literally starting from scratch. And one thing we focused on very quickly was flipping low-level materials, simply because it required me to have very little gold to get into it. I spent maybe a couple of hours farming, picked up some materials, sold those quick enough to get some starting capital, and then I just kept reinvesting that gold, and we're steadily increasing day by day. Not by huge amounts, but you got to start somewhere. And flipping of low-level materials was the catalyst for me to get going to begin with. The fact that you can start with very little is a big advantage to many people. There's also the thought process to be a big advantage for flipping is that you can, well, everything with frequent value can be flipped. A lot of people often turn around and state that, well, anything can be flipped, but that's not necessarily true. Because we're focusing very heavily on fast things, we want to be acting at speed. Speed is key for flipping to get some good success out of it. And so you want things that are frequently valuable to many people. So this is why current content stuff is usually a prime target for people looking to flip things. Current content materials, if you've got a reasonable amount of gold, can be a very, very lucrative thing. You could buy, I don't know, 1,000 Widow Bloom early in the morning because you see somebody post it cheap, and by the end of the day you could have sold it and made 2 or 3 gold profit on each piece of Widow Bloom that you sell, just as an example. Things that are in constant demand by people, consumables fall into this category. Current expansion gear, leveling gear, most of the markets can be, you can have some success by flipping within those markets. And easily the biggest advantage for many people when it comes to flipping is quite simply, you can make a lot of gold, and you can make a lot of gold quickly. This is the biggest advantage for most, right? People always want to know, well, can I put the least amount of effort in, and what is the maximum amount of reward I can get out of it? Flipping is very good at that. There's no real sort of limitations. If you go out and you farm, if you're farming materials or you're skinning or doing some sort of gathering, there's usually a limitation to how effective you can be. There's going to be, you know, maybe at this current time you might be able to make 25,000 gold an hour, but you're going to have to do a lot of extra work and time and effort and optimizing to even get to 30,000 gold an hour. With flipping, there's really no limit. As long as you have a good understanding of the items, as long as there's a reasonable amount of people looking to buy those items, you can do flipping all day long. You can do it for 5 minutes, you can do it for 10 minutes, you can do it for 5 hours, and you'll make a lot of gold because of it. So there's some good advantages to getting good at this method of gold making. There are, though, some disadvantages. Like with everything, nothing is perfect, right? One of the biggest disadvantages that I see a lot with flipping is that it does require a sizable amount of knowledge of the markets to begin with. Like I said earlier, it's such a fast turnaround thing. You often don't have time to learn as you go. You kind of need to know the answers to the questions you're going to come across before you come across them, so that you know, right, well, I can now see that this item is being listed cheaply. I need to buy this now before somebody else buys it. That's the kind of knowledge that you need to have ahead of time. You need to know why an item is valuable, roughly how many of it is going to be sold, what the current market price is, and when you know all of these little snippets of information, you can make decisions very quickly. And the quicker you can make your decisions whether to buy something or to not buy something, the greater success rate you'll have. Now, add-ons do come into play with this and help you out a lot. Trade School Master in recent times has got a lot better at giving us the information that we might need to help make these decisions. So you can alleviate some of the, requirement for having that good market knowledge if you understand how the data that Trade School Master presents you, what it means, how to interpret it correctly. Do you know what the sell rate numbers actually refer to? Do you know that how the average daily sold of any given item, how that is calculated? Do you know how that data looks? If you know that side of stuff, you don't need to know quite so much about the items themselves, which is a plus point. But once again, it requires you to learn Trade School Master, which is one step further than a lot of people want to do, I understand. And another disadvantage of flipping, the second, probably the biggest concern for most people when it comes to getting into flipping, is that the risk is significantly higher than what it is with other gold making methods. To bring a comparison to flipping, for example, to farming, sorry. Farming is almost zero risk. You're investing nothing but your own personal time. You're spending time going out into the world and getting something, whether you be getting some transmog or whether you be getting some materials or whatever the case may be. You're trading your time for something, whereas with flipping, your time is not the commodity that you're trading. You're actually trading using the gold you've already made. So every time you invest in something to flip, you're having to spend your gold, and you're going to have to trust yourself that you can sell it for more than what you buy it for. So to a lot of people, that's a risk that they're not willing to take. But as you earn more gold, the value of the items that you're buying and flipping becomes a smaller percentage of your actual gold total, and that helps alleviate the risk for many. Now, this is all good and well, though, but how does this actually work in practice in-game? Well, let's look at a few example markets. I've jotted down some example markets that are sort of prime candidates for people to do some flipping with. Now, we'll start with the low-level material stuff. I mentioned earlier that we have started on the NA realms pretty recently, and low-level material flipping was a catalyst for me to get going into gold making over there. Why is it a good market, though? Well, low-level materials tend to be very cheap. The average value of an old herb or an old piece of ore or something is pretty cheap, meaning that you don't have to have a lot of gold to start buying some of these things. And you also then have a lot more information, probably, about these items. They're going to be less volatile in price. By volatile, I mean the fact that they're likely to be a very similar price, making it a little bit easier to spot sort of good deals, and you have a stronger understanding of roughly what you should be able to sell them for. Some examples of low-level materials that are good to keep your eyes on would be things like, basically any material that goes into making a mount. Many professions out there, engineering, alchemy, blacksmithing, for example, have a bunch of mounts that they can craft and sell on the auction house. Now, any material that goes into making one of those is going to be a low-level material that will probably consistently sell. Now, there may not be people consistently farming it, or there may be people over-farming it in a very short period of time, pushing the price down until, those people that need the materials come in to buy them. So there are often some good deals to be had on these. So you're looking at things like Ghost Iron Ore. Ghost Iron Ore goes into your Sky Golems. To pick another one that's popular, Vial of the Sands, for example. Vial of the Sands needs a lot of, Whiptail, Cinderbloom, Azhara's Veil. These are all Cataclysm materials. This is also a reason to why things like volatile air, fire, and water are still in demand, because they actually all build into making these mounts. Now, of course, people love buying mounts. Mounts are a very, very steady seller. And so even those materials, even from many, many expansions ago, still have some strong value in the market. There is a downside of the low-level material market, though. There is a lot of trash out there that you should do your best to avoid. Even things that are arguably rare materials, platinum ore, for example, is a great example of this. A platinum ore from only the last expansion, Battle for Azeroth. Platinum ore is technically the rare version of the ore, but in comparison to Storm Silver and Monolite, it's absolutely worthless, mainly because there were some cool things that used it back in the day, but those same cool things are just not applicable in today's game anymore, meaning that the value of the materials is basically zero. So you have got to be careful with the low-level material markets, that you don't end up buying things, even if it looks super cheap, right? You got to be careful that you don't buy things to flip that you're going to have a real problem selling again, because there's just not enough people that want them. This all comes back into that, you need that little bit of market knowledge. But low-level material market is a good start. Secondly, I wanted to talk about raid BOEs for a minute. Raid BOEs were, I would say, one of the most stable ways to flip items for many expansions now. The raid BOEs tend to be very high item level compared to what most people can get. In many cases, they're sort of best in slot items until you replace that item from a high difficulty level boss kill. The downside is, though, that they tend to be very expensive. This means that there's not many people on your server that even have the gold or are willing to risk that gold buying and selling these raid BOEs. But if it's a market that you know a lot of, if you are an active raider, you probably have a good idea of, right, well, these classes are popular in the raid right now. They favor haste or they favor mastery or something. And so then you can say that, right, well, okay, now because of that, I know that this BOE is probably worth more than this other BOE. And you start to build a picture in your head, and the market knowledge comes about. And you can maybe occasionally spot those raid BOEs going for less than what they probably should do. Buy them up cheap, relist them, hope to make yourself a nice little profit there. Raid BOEs, though, do come with greater risk factor. You're spending a lot more on just one item. You're putting a lot of eggs in one basket. If you drop that basket, you're at risk of losing a lot more because of it. So you have to be prepared to maybe win a few times, to lose occasionally. Nobody has a 100% success rate with the items that they buy to try and resell. Goal makers will probably try and tell you about all of the good things that they do. Screenshots will always go out of the good flips that they've made. Not so frequently will they tell you about the massive failures. My words. They won't tell you about the losses, let's put it that way. But as long as you win more often than you lose, you're still coming out ahead. So yeah, greater knowledge is probably needed for raid BOEs, but if you know the market well, patch 8.3, the very tail end of Battle for Azeroth, for example, was a prime example of this, when we had basically RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG. When it came to these raid BOEs, were they the right item level? Did they have the right secondary stats? Did they have the right corruption on them? Did they have the right tier of corruption on them? Did they have a socket on them? All of these factors went into the valuation of a BOE, and those that were in the know were able to spot those good deals, buy them up off the auction house, relist them for an outrageously high markup, and very, very frequently sell them to the person that fully understands the value of that item as well. Raid BOEs, not as profitable nowadays. The cash cow for that sort of stuff is probably legendaries, which is not necessarily something that you're going to be flipping. It's very heavily focused on a different goal making strategy, being just general profession crafting. But it still should be mentioned. The last one I wanted to talk about, the last little market I wanted to sort of dive into, also very briefly for this, is pets. Now, the pet market isn't technically a flipping market like we defined earlier in the video. We tend to define flipping as something that we can do relatively quickly. Pets is more considered arbitrage, which is a subtle difference, right? Pets, you tend to have the ability to buy them on one realm, where the market value of that pet is whatever it may be, and then cage it up and send it to another realm where the value of it might be higher. This means that you're going outside of your, little economic bubble. You're stepping outside of whatever your market is, and you're moving into another market. This is why it's more considered like an arbitrage rather than just a flip. You can, for sure, buy pets, flip them on your own realm, but the speed of which pets sell, you're once again falling more into an investment opportunity when you're dealing with pets. But some of the key features of pets do sort of shine through for flipping. So they're an evergreen market. Pets are an evergreen market, and what I mean by that is that there is always people out there interested in buying pets. It doesn't matter whether there's a brand new raid out, whether it's the first patch or the last patch of an expansion. None of this really matters. There are always people looking to add to their pet collection, especially if they like to engage in pet battles in the game in the first place. There will be a huge or very steady demand, I would say, for pets. And this makes the market relatively stable. And now a stable market is a good one to look for good deals in. Because if you know the price of an item is relatively stable, when you see something significantly below that, you have to think less about buying it because you know that you can probably pick it up and sell it for a higher price quite consistently. And the other advantage for pets is that they scale very well. Most flipping opportunities, the two markets that we've talked about previously being low-level materials and raid BOEs, tend to have a bit of a ceiling of opportunity on them because you're only buying the good deals. You may log on to your auction house and there just not be any good deals. It's more than acceptable, by the way, when you're out there shopping for things to flip, to not buy something. This is also another thing I see happen very frequently. People say that they want to start making gold by flipping, and they go to the auction house and they start buying stuff because they feel that they should be buying stuff when actually they're overpaying for a lot of stuff and they're making mistakes in buying that in the first place. Pets, on the other hand, they do scale very well. Because you're not dealing with just your server's economy, you're stepping outside of the realms of your personal economy, and you have the ability to, that pet that you buy on your realm for 10,000 gold, you can look at every other realm within the region and say, right, well, actually, that realm over there, this same pet is all of a sudden worth 25,000 gold. I'm going to list it for sale over there, and I'm going to make my profit that way. Now, pets are a little bit more difficult to, do the accounting for. It's a bit more difficult to keep track of all of these numbers because we don't have fancy tools like Tradeschool Master to help us. Tradeschool Master still to this day only keeps its pricing data within the one realm. It doesn't share it across. Maybe we can suggest that to the TSM guys and see if they can do something for that nature. And more importantly, if any of you guys know an easy way to manage that, please let me know because I'm looking to get deeper into the pet market myself. But that's a topic for another conversation. But as you can see, that it scales nicely. You're not limited by the four walls that you play within. You can buy and sell your pets on many different realms. So I hope that helps you, boys and girls. I hope that gives you a bit of a stronger idea of how flipping can be a very profitable way to make gold in the game. You can get up and running with it nice and quickly. And there's not too many complications within the market. Start small, buy a few things, try and focus on selling them quickly, and you should hopefully have a lot of luck with it. But there we go. I'll leave it there for this first podcast, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed this. If you like this style of video, remember to give a video a like. Please remember to drop some comments down below if you made it this far onto a name for the podcast. There's a big section up here where I want to put a title, I want to put a name for the podcast that I just, I haven't as of yet. So leave your comments down below on what you think the podcast should be called. But I'll leave it there for today. I'll try and make this podcast a weekly thing. I don't want to sort of specify a day just yet until I've worked out all of the logistics around it. But please, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. You can always jump onto the Discord. Discord is where we tend to do a lot of our goal making discussion. A lot of topics we go through there in a bit of detail before they end up being fully fledged videos such as this. So the link for that is down in the description. And finally, once again, big shout out to my Patreons. You're the guys that help make this content a reality. So big shout out and a thank you from me personally. I'll leave it there for today, boys and girls. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.